All right, hey everybody, welcome back to our reading of 1984 by George Orwell. We're now starting part 2, and so that's one of the things that's important to remember about this book. If you're listening to an audiobook, I'm sure that there is a division into parts as well, but if you have the print book, there are 3 parts to this book, and then the chapter numbers are going to reset within each part. So now that we're in now that we're in part 2, we'll be back to chapter 1. So without further ado, let's get into part 2, chapter 1. Now, much of this chapter is going to revolve around the girl from the fiction department and the unknowns that come along with her. We know from the last chapters that we've been making predictions about what her role in the story may or may not be. So continue to predict. Predicting is just a good way of knowing that you're interacting with the text, that you're picking up on all the details, like an investigation, and you get the satisfaction or gratification of potentially being right at the end. So let's go ahead and get into it. In my book, in the Signet Classic Edition, we are on page 105. So the girl from the fiction department has her arm in a sling, and Winston notices this the next time he sees her. He notes that, it's a common injury in the fiction department, which makes it sound like some sort of factory. This goes along with the idea of newspeak, or doublespeak even, where a fiction department, what we would assume a fiction department to be, would be, maybe some people writing, which should not be a manual labor job at all. But Winston seemingly knows that to work in the fiction department is involving some sort of heavy machinery, unless it's like giant printing presses or something like that, but who knows. The point is that she's injured in some sort of a factory injury. And she is coming toward him, walking down the hallway. And now is the moment where we're going to determine whether our predictions have been correct or not. Because at this point, we already discussed how last time we saw her, there was no way that she is a coincidence any longer. She is definitely there for a reason. She sees him for a reason. And the question is whether she has good or bad intentions. Now, here's an interesting thing to note is how the description of her changes, how Winston's description of her changes. There's some sexuality in the description now, and there's even maybe a touch of empathy. This goes along with some of the ideas we've talked about, how human emotions, human reactions are foreign to the people of this new society. When he sees her fall, he actually feels her pain, right? He feels how that would hurt to fall on that broken arm, and that's empathy, right? Being able to understand or put yourself in somebody else's position to feel what they feel. And this is foreign to Winston. He's not felt this way in a long time. In terms of the description, or the more sexualized description of the girl, he notices that her face had turned a milky yellow color, against which her mouth stood out redder than ever. So the milky texture of skin and the redder color of mouth, these are indications that there is some sort of sexual lust either just on Winston's side, like he's seeing her in a new light, or perhaps like she is flushed too, which could mean that she is, nervous or actually maybe feeling some way toward him. And as she falls, she passes him a scrap of folded paper. The telescreens are watching everywhere, and Winston notes he wanted to go read it in the bathroom, but the bathroom would be the one place that you could be sure where they were watching you all the time. Which sounds gross, it sounds disgusting, but if you think about it, if somebody needs privacy to commit thought crime, the party's idea is that we'll monitor the bathrooms because that's where people think that they're alone. That's where people would go to have a private moment, and we're going to be the most invasive in your most private moment. So Winston, all during this time where he's not able to read the note, his mind is racing. He's thinking, could it be from the thought police summoning him for execution or exile? Could it be from the Brotherhood, which is mentioned in regards to Emmanuel Goldstein as being a sort of underground organization that's fighting against the party? Now, when he does finally get to read the message at his desk, he's frantic and he has to read it over and over again before destroying it in the memory hole, because it simply reads, "I love you." And these are neither of the messages he expected. We mentioned in the past how he's been missing his community center time, and he did feel like he needed to go there tonight. And in fact, he actually even kind of enjoyed it just to get his mind off of things. He had to go through a lecture about ingsoc in relation to chess at the community center. And now we're going to talk a little bit about critical theory in our class. I believe at this point in our video series we've already talked a bit about critical theory, but this is an interesting idea here that this lecture is called ingsoc in relation to chess, right? And the fact that it's a lecture is one thing, which means you're being talked at. And there's this idea of education or re-education in culture, which usually goes along with lectures, which are not discussions or dialogues. They're somebody telling you what it is, what you're going to do. And here you have ingsoc in relation to chess, which is a political ideology related to a game and should have pretty much nothing to do with politics other than the fact that it's an analog for war. Obviously, the game of chess is a representation of war. So this reminds me of, in relation to critical theory, how there is a tendency in certain circles and in certain ideologies to politicize as many things as possible, where all things are political, everything is seen as a political action. For example, there are those like Marx who would say that everything it can be summed up in sort of a political relationship, a conflict theory, if you will, of proletariat and bourgeoisie. If you all have any thoughts about how there's a sane and rational way to relate ingsoc to chess, I would like to hear it. But again, I believe this is satire, and I believe Orwell is satirizing the tendency of maybe more Marxist fundamentalists to read politics into every facet of culture and life, into art, into fun, into games. Everything has to have a political element that supports the party ideology. Now, continuing on, it wasn't until 11 p.m. at home in bed where Winston could finally think continuously. And this shows you how in this society, if you wanted to formulate ideas of your own, it was difficult, especially for working class people. After a hard day's work, you work the whole day, you go to the community center, they're all drinking gin, so you're probably you have a little buzz, and you have to stay up in bed past 11 o'clock to be able to think alone. And you probably have to wake up at 6, 7 o'clock the next day. So for most people who don't make a very, very exerted effort, you're not going to be having a lot of thoughts, and you're not going to have time to think ideas, complicated ideas through. Whereas today, we could go on a walk. You could just sit by yourself. You can read. There's a lot of things that are currently taking away from our time to do this, particularly various technologies. Boredom is less and less of a thing in our society, and I do believe that boredom inspires creativity to some extent, and boredom can at least open up a channel for thought in the absence of anything else to do. But this just kind of reminds me of the lack of boredom in our society, and how it can be difficult to think through difficult ideas now because you have so many other options that are more entertaining and easier and fun. After reading the note that said "I love you," Winston has a newfound desire to stay alive. He tells himself, no more stupid risks. There's somebody out there that maybe thinks like I do and that said "I love you," and so that gives him a new reason to live. Now, her agitation was her worry that she was taking a massive risk giving him the note. So, when he saw her in the hallway and she was flustered and maybe she was flush, now he understands why this was happening. It was that, she's taking a massive risk here. she doesn't know. She's never spoken to him. She doesn't know if he's a party official. She doesn't know if he's going to take the note and immediately turn around and snitch on him, which maybe 90% or more of the population would do. So she's taking a very, very calculated risk. And I'm inferring, or I can deduce by all the things that I've read so far, that you know the times that she was monitoring Winston and following him was to get a read on him and try to determine what kind of person is he. And seeing him in the parole areas and seeing him do these particular things and make these particular faces are the subtle clues that she needed to say, it looks like he's not a strict party ideologue. He's not going to conform completely, and maybe he'll read my words and not turn me in. And that's a massive risk, because that could have been the end of her life right there. Something interesting to note, mail is not really a thing in this society. When he's trying to weigh all the options of getting in touch with her, he realizes, well, I can't mail her, because the main form of mail are these postcards with pre-typed phrases. And then what you do is you just go through and check the boxes that are the phrases that apply, and then cross out the ones that don't apply. So say you have a card and it says like, hi, I miss you, and how have you been, and it says wishing you the best, and I hate you, and you haven't paid me back. And then you just go through and kind of like, okay, yes on this one, no on that one, and then send it out in the mail. So again, there's this limitation of thought, of creativity, of coming up with your own ideas and communication in 1984. Now, they finally agree by talking in the canteen. And so they go through this elaborate dance over multiple days of trying to find a table that's in the middle of the canteen, away from the telescreens, where they can just mumble a few words over their food, excuse me. And they agree to meet in Victory Square near a monument when it's crowded. And that's a very open place with many telescreens, but hopefully there will be enough people to where they can blend in. And the last real thing of note in this chapter is that as they're meeting in the square, truckloads of Eurasian prisoners passed by wearing leg irons. Winston notes the appearance of these prisoners as somewhat Asian in the beginning, but then also European too. So you have the phrase, obviously, Eurasian. We can guess. I actually don't know exactly what that area would be referring to. Maybe it's like Russia bordering on Asia, India maybe, because there's also East Asia, so I'm assuming East Asia would be the farthest east. I haven't specifically looked into that, but overall it's not too important, it's not too important exactly where it is. The idea is that it's so unusual to see other people from outside of the society. He's making eye contact with them as they're all being trucked by, and the whole crowd is shouting these dehumanizing phrases and basically cheering on what will be the death of thousands of people just because they're not from where they're from. At first, the party members booed the prisoners, but there were proles there too, and the main emotion was curiosity. Foreigners were never seen. Okay, let me go back to this Eurasian idea. So truckloads of Eurasian prisoners are passed by wearing leg irons. And so at first Winston notices how it's party members who are mostly booing, like boo, and wishing them death. But there were many proles in the crowd too, and the main emotions seemed to be curiosity, honestly, rather than hatred, because foreigners were never seen in this society. This is a closed society where people don't come in or out. So to see Eurasian prisoners that have an Asian appearance, that have maybe like a Russian appearance, was strange to them. They couldn't understand it. And it was as if they were strange animals, which is Winston's quote there, which has this dehumanizing effect. This reminds me of today as an analog of somewhere like North Korea, which is a society that's completely enclosed. And for somebody in North Korea to see somebody outside of their society would be so striking, and it would strike so much curiosity in them, just because they never encounter it. As a United States citizen, it's not even worthwhile to note at all when you see people from different places, because that's just your everyday part of life. So just think about how different that would be. So at the end of this chapter, she gives him some very complicated directions that he has to remember for where they're going to meet and when. So just be continuing to make predictions using the foreshadowing from previous chapters, and we'll continue to learn about their relationship and what's going to happen in the next couple chapters. Good job, guys. I'll see you in the comments. Have a nice day.